Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with KC jazz saxophonist and veteran of the jazz arts, Chris Burnett of the KC Area Youth Jazz. Mr. Burnett returned home to Kansas City in 2001 after serving 22 years with military jazz bands. He worked with Leon A. Brady's famous jazz education program for 5 years until Mr. Brady retired, and then with other jazz education programs. As a leader of this new premier student jazz artist opportunity, Youth Jazz, he is training the next generation of jazz musicians. We had a very engaging talk about his mission, vision, the shows they have planned, the recordings, and so much more. So please get to know him and this initiative.
Chris, thank you for taking a minute out to talk about the KC Area Youth Jazz. You're always a very busy ambassador through the music and through the education, and this sounds like a very nice, solid venture that you got going right now.
The big thing about KC Area Youth Jazz, it's not reinventing the wheel necessarily, but it shifts the paradigm in the private youth jazz education sphere. As you may recall, I started out working with youth jazz here in Kansas City with Mr. Brady. It was called Kansas City Youth Jazz. And when Mr. Brady retired, after I was working with him about 5 years, he retired. I talked with him. I said, I'd like to start something like this in the area that I'm at, Leavenworth, because there could be always, he says, that's great. Anything I can do to help you, blah, blah, blah. As it turned out, though, when Mr. Brady retired, this program, Clarence Smith took it over, as you may recall, over at Penn Valley. So it was essentially Kansas City Youth Jazz with Clarence Smith leading it. And it was at Penn Valley rather than 13th and Central in Kansas City, Kansas, where Mr. Brady's building was. So fast forward a bit, the Penn Valley Clarence's program shut down. I had wanted to do something like this from the beginning, but I just didn't have the schedule to really put this business plan in place. During the time I worked with Mr. Brady, I was writing a business plan that I thought would work, but it's a different model. The KC Area Youth Jazz, and I talked to Mr. Brady about that. I said, I want to use Youth Jazz in the name of this. He says, go ahead. If this isn't going to be negative to you, go ahead. And I talked with Clarence about this. I said, Clarence, I want to start this youth jazz program. Clarence is now doing the Jazz Academy at the American Jazz Museum. And I think there's another gentleman, Marcus Lewis, a trombone player. He's got a youth jazz type program, and he's out of Overland Park. I think he works out of the Johnson County Community College. But this program is going to be based out of BRC Audio Productions. I'm doing it in affiliation with Bill Crane. And how that came about was I was talking with Bill about this. He saw me posting about it, and I have the public-facing business plan on the website, youthjazz.us. And it's in detail and everything else. And Bill saw that and he went through it. And then we were talking on the phone because I'm going to record there in October with my quintet. And he said, hey, man, that looks really good. And where are you going to host this thing? And I said, well, I've got a space here in Leavenworth that I can do it. And, we'll have to bring in a keyboard, things like that, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, why don't you have it at my facility? I've got a place where you could rehearse, where they could do a concert to debut them. And I'd like to be involved. And if you know Bill Crane, if you know anything about his history, Bill Crane is very significant in jazz education in the state of Missouri. I think he was over at Central Missouri, and he started the jazz program there. So the state of jazz and the state of Missouri, the state of jazz education, Bill Crane is very instrumental in it. And I have students who had studied with him, and I'd heard of Bill Crane before I came back home after the military. So to have Bill involved is really a great thing. Let me get to the differences. When you say youth jazz, you think of a certain thing in your mind, don't you?
Sure.
But this is beyond the concept that we even had at Kansas City Youth Jazz with Mr. Brady. What we want to do is we want to teach them some of the realities of being a jazz artist. If you're going to do this for a living or if you're going to go major in it, you have to understand the things on the other side of the horn as well. we are going to produce 3 products each season. And those 3 products are going to support the program. It's not a nonprofit organization, which is unusual. We are going to earn our keep like you do as a jazz musician. You're not subsidized. You subsidize your own art. So what we're teaching is the realities of, hey, we've got to sell venues concerts for our price. Then we've got to sell our recording. We're going to do some pre-sales of that pretty soon, but we've got it up there. And we've got to see if we can get people to buy anything else that we're doing. And our third product happens to be, it's an octet, and we're having people be chair sponsors if they want to. And you can have as many chair sponsors of the 8 as you want to. We can have only 8, we can have 7, we can have 80. There could be 5 people on each chair sponsoring. And we set prices for those. Price for the chair sponsor, price for a gig. If you hire the group for an hour concert, it's going to cost you X amount of dollars, and the kids will get paid. So it's not like, it's not too unlike the realities that we face as a jazz musician. They're going to prepare music for their season. We've got Dr. Arthur White he's composing like 6 tunes for them, and those will be recorded definitely, and we'll record a couple of other pieces. I've got a couple of other arrangers who have written some stuff that we will play and record, and then we'll record that at the end of the season and put out a record, a vinyl LP and a digital record. A vinyl LP for the fact that it'll be, the heavy audiophile collector's type thing, and it'll sound great. It'll have nice artwork and packaging. The guy who did our art direction for Echoes of Europe, the thing we did with Dino Massa, he's going to do the art direction for the youth jazz products. And each year, the fellows, we call them Kansas City Area Youth Jazz Fellows, once they make the band. And how that goes, they have to audition. And the audition is a lot different than most things that you see where somebody's videotaping themselves playing Billy's Bounce or something like that. We want to see if they can play their scales. And we're going to have all that written out. We're going to have it's an extensive thing. We want them to use their smartphone. I don't want you to go to the studio and pay local professional rhythm players to be in your band. And we can see if you can play these baseline things. And then based on their pedigree and their resume, they'll give us information when they sign up to audition, what school they go to, if they're taking private lessons, the private teacher's name, and their parents are involved in that process as well. We believe that all of the leading artists that you see in jazz today, and many of them who you interview on your show and we read about in Downbeat or we buy their records, or et cetera, those people did not just come out of a vacuum or from one teacher. They came out of a scene, and some of it was national and international, where a collective group of people poured into those young artists who were extremely talented and gifted to begin with. And that's who we are attracting for the KC Area Youth Jazz. We want the best of the best to audition for this. And let's say we get 1 for each instrument or 2 for each instrument. We want to have subs as well. But the main octet will be the ones we select for that season as fellows. We will close off the auditions at some point, and that's like the 31st of December. And we will make our selections based upon the submissions for auditions and what they did with the audition package and what we come to. And we'll make the announcement, and at the time of the announcement in February, we will send them their music for the season. And what they'll do February and March is they'll practice their music on their own with their teachers. And when they come to rehearsals April and May, Bill will be putting together a product. He'll be putting together an ensemble, much like these honors ensembles or these elite groups that from around the country. And he will basically be putting the concert together for them and fine-tuning and using his expertise as a professional to elevate them and build an ensemble out of that group of great young players. June and July is when they'll do their performances. We'd like to have at least one performance a week for them where they would get paid at least $50 a gig. So that'd be a nice little summer job. And it's a spring and summer program, so we're not taking their entire year with this program because, and then I hope a couple of things come out of this. Number one, I hope it catches on with, and Kansas City embraces it. Elements like businesses, like corporations hire these kids to come play a concert at one of their functions, blah, blah, blah. It's relatively cheap compared to what you'd pay, you know. But still, the kids are doing commerce, and the kids are learning that art has value beyond the aesthetic, and in addition to the aesthetic, and then it puts them in the business mind frame, and it works the other side of their brain as well. So, and then during the course of that season, from April until August really is when it's over, like when they're done recording, and we're doing that. But they're in a sense done in July, the first part of July. Before they even go to band camp, they'll be done with KC Area Youth Jazz season. But what I would like to see happen during that, we've got people who have already volunteered throughout the scene, the jazz scene, Kansas City local and beyond, to be consultants to come in. And during the 90-minute block that's set for the fellows' rehearsals, there's a 30-minute, 20-minute master class by someone talking about composing for film, somebody talking about this aspect of improvisation. You know, we've got a list of people on there who, on the site, if you go to youthjazz.us, who have already committed. They're excited about it as well. Yeah, I'll come in. And what we're going to do is compensate those people based upon our product sales and the budget that I have laid out, which is really reasonable. And we'll be able to see what we can afford, and then we'll hire people as the season goes on. And as it catches on, I think that people will embrace it, because you don't have to buy a chair sponsorship for $150. You don't have to we're selling the limited edition heavy vinyl records for $50 a piece. And I think that's the great thing, because some of these students, they're going to be like the Bobby Watsons of the future. You see what I'm saying? Or the Pat Metheny's of the future, and of the Logan Richardsons of the future, the great people who have come out of here, you know. They're going to be those people of the future, and to have that album with them on it is going to be a great keepsake in a lot of other ways. And then it's going to sound really good, because I think that they're going to surprise a lot of people at the caliber of artists you're talking about in our youngest generation. The next thing about it that I think is really unique and interesting is we are having all the generations interact. You know, on the scene, what Bill and I were talking about, we were both in our 60s, young 60s or whatever, but not many of the people in their 20s interact with me or Bill. And he talks about it. He says, man, I have a lot of stuff I can share with them, and I'm at a point in my life where I can share that, you know. But we sit in our silos, if you will. And I'm fortunate that I get to interact by educating and teaching people. But the average musician like Bill, running a business and then performing all around the country or whatever, he has things to share, and he'll be able to interact. And then by us bringing in these consultants, we have people that cut across the entire demographic, from the youngest to the elder statesman age people, the senior people, who will come in and interact with these young people and pour into them as well. So it isn't the Chris Burnett or Bill Crane show. It is the Kansas City Area Youth Jazz. It's something that we're doing. And then when we get to a point where we age out and want to do something else, we're hoping to be able to leave this to some of these young people who are acting as consultants now and say, hey, you guys can take this over. It's working like this. This is the model we're using, and we've tweaked it to the point where it's successful, and you can take it to the next level in your time and era. That's what we're hoping for, something that is valid, because a lot of times what I found in working with Mr. Brady's great program, is a legendary program. He did it for like a decade and longer than a decade, probably about 12 years, a dozen years. And it was always very successful. But Mr. Brady had the personality that I'd always watch him. I started a combo class. He let me start a combo class there because the kids needed to learn how to improvise. We always did something really cool with Mr. Brady's programs. He had big bands, and he named them after the old clubs in Kansas City, like the Reno Club, the Hey Hey Club, all the different clubs. He had about 4 or 5 big bands of kids, and they were based on age group, like 6th graders on up to 12th graders. And more advanced, the top band was the Reno band. That's the one that went to the Monterey Next Generation Jazz Festival. And Mr. Brady would have a specialist, like I was the woodwind specialist during my time on faculty there. There was a trombone, there was a trumpet, there's rhythm. And we worked with the kids before they went in for rehearsal. We worked with them on their music, and then they went into rehearsal, and then he and Clarence were the directors of the bands, and they put the bands together. They put the charts together. The kids were playing the notes. That's a very big thing. But what I noticed, they play the written, the through composed part of the chart very well, but when it got to the improvisation, they hadn't a clue what they were doing. So what I suggested to Mr. Brady after a couple of years being there, I said, Mr. Brady, I would like to start a combo lab where we are learning the different song forms, like rhythm changes, blues changes, the different tunes that go with those, and teaching the kids what scales are required and language and things like that. And he said, yeah, go for that. We just never had anybody that wanted to do that, or we just didn't have the time to do it. Go for it. So after a year of doing that, I started at 11:30. That's where everything stopped from the morning. They started like at 8 o'clock in the morning, went to 11:30, and then they were done every Saturday. But the combo, 11:30 lab combo, we started at 11:30 and went to 12:30. It turned out these kids, like I had Houston Smith in there, I had Isaiah Carter, these kids are in Berkeley now. I mean, and they ended up playing on Good Morning America, but they were talented kids, and showing them song forms and showing them what scales you're supposed to use and how to use those scales to get through progression, that opened up the youth jazz to a whole different level, because when those kids sat down in the big band, they actually were playing coherent improvisations, and people weren't just going, oh, that's cute. With KC Area Youth Jazz, this new organization, I don't want people looking at the kids going, oh, isn't that cute? They can do that, but when they hear the music coming out of them, they're going to go, oh my goodness, isn't that great? That's what we want, because I think that if you give them the right information, and if everybody is directing them and taking a part in their development, you'll get that kind of artistry out of the students. Now, one of the other things that really motivates me about being involved with the next generation of jazz is the fact that jazz is over 100 years old now. And the music it's just so deep. It's huge. And what we are lacking on in our time, and I think what we can do as artists, educators, performers, teachers, composers, venue owners, we can start looking at a more modern infrastructure, because our business infrastructure is not caught up with the music. The music is if you listen to the progressive jazz, which you do every day on your show, you're probably screening records now, but the music has gone from Congo Square to, wow, this real, it still has that earthiness, but it's so sophisticated and subtle that I don't think presenting it like you did in the 1940s is the way to go with this music. Some of it belongs in a concert hall. Some of it belongs on the patio in the summer. Some of it belongs on the street. Some of it belongs in a restaurant or a jazz club. It's so diverse that I think we're missing the point trying to do a one size fit all. So that's why Casey Area Youth Jazz, our business model, is different and unique than anything I've seen. And I've been involved in the youth jazz education field since I returned in 2001 here in Kansas City. So I'm not a new player in this. And I'm not, and a couple of cats approached me when I first put this out. Oh man, I don't think that this area can support this. I'm going like, what do you mean? We could have 20 of these and still not reach all the kids who would benefit. And I know that from experience. And then this is not taking away from Clarence's program. It's not taking away from Marcus Lewis's program. It's not taking away from the 5-star jazz band that the guy has north of the river. It's just adding to the firmament. It's going to give an elite program that's right here in Kansas City, which should have one of like the best of this youngest generation where they come together as a peer group. And I'm hoping we start with one octet. And then I'm going to take enough to have subs for that. Like it'll be in essence 2 octets. Right now we've got 10 people who have requested auditions, and I've looked at their background, and most of them are all-state players, and some of them I've heard play like the basically bassy thing that Jim Mayer has, the 18th and Vine Jazz Festival that Clarence has. I've heard these players. I've heard these kids, and then some of them my students know who they are. Like one of my students who's going to Berkeley. He knows several of these players. He goes, yeah. And then one of the alto players is one of my students that has auditioned. So it's going to be a really great group.
That's perfect. And that gives me a perfect overview and a perfect insight into what you're doing and how you're doing it. And we'll monitor this at Neon Jazz. And once music comes out, we'll be more than happy to play it. But I think this is going to give the audience a really good overview of what you're doing, give them kind of a digestible overview of what you're doing, the impact. So, Chris, thank you for taking some time out. I appreciate you talking about it and giving me your time, and good luck with everything.
Thank you very much, Joe.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Kansas City and spots all over the globe, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Chris for his time and his dedication to Kansas City jazz. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz@youtube.com. And for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.